We are not your ordinary family, but we can all agree that we are close can be. See. With these jingles that I'm singing, guys, maybe you should leave a comment of whether or not you know the song that I'm singing. I feel like that could be a thing for us. No? Okay. Just thought. Friends, welcome back to Save Black Girl Reads, where I am your host, Ariel, the best friend in your head that you never knew that you needed, but you are so glad that you have. Welcome back to week 8, guys. We are finally here. 8 is the number, okay? And it is our final week of Becoming by Michelle Obama. Oh. Guys, this has been such a journey with Michelle Obama as our fearless leader. And as I stated in the inaugural video, we were reading this as a commemoration, if you will, as a time filler, if you will, for her new book that is coming out November 15th. The Light We Carry. So essentially, and if you haven't noticed, yes, girl, there is still some time between now and when the actual book comes out. So, and we'll talk about next books once we get through the review. So let's just go ahead, jump right in, because we're going over chapters 22, 23, 24, and the epilogue, honey. Like, we are doing all of it. We're wrapping it up today. So let's just start with chapter 22. She talks about this bad dream that she has where it's lions and tigers and bears, oh my, and some tranquilizers are involved, and little Sasha gets shot with a train dart. And I was like, oh my goodness. Just at one point I was reading it and I was like, no, baby Sasha, no. And again, guys, let me tell you, it's been 4 years since I've read this book and still shocked. Still. So yes. So she talked about how this is the dream that's happening, and she's interpreted it as her feeling anxious about losing her self-sufficiency, about the fact that a bunch of 20-somethings, she's in her 40s, mind you, at this time, and a bunch of 20-somethings have complete control over her scheduling, over her children's scheduling, over all of the things, and she has to trust them to know that they're going to get her to where she needs to go when she needs to be there. And it's the fact that her, as a settled person who likes to be in control, that she's having to relinquish it, and it's causing some anxiety. But one thing that we see is that she and Barack Obama are trying to, or not trying, but they're really getting into a groove here, of this POTUS FLOTUS thing that they got going on, to a point where she highlighted it on page 343, where she said, we understood what we represented. We understood that we represented the nation, and we were obligated to step forward and be present when there was tragedy or hardship or confusion. And she kind of highlights it in terms of like a lot of the chaos that has taken place with I think it was like the oil rig spill in the Gulf of Mexico, and people stopped going to vacation, and then he had to, they went down to the Florida, the Florida that faced the Gulf of Mexico, and they, essentially they took photos in the water to reassure the people that the water was clean and clear and under control. So yeah. And so she also talks about, even in the space of them representing calm, cool, steadiness in times of chaos, she also talks about the fortitude that she felt when going to visit military members and their families, because during this time when they start out in Barack Obama's presidency, remember, the United States was over in Iraq and Afghanistan fighting in the war. So you have these members coming back. Some are now having to have limbs amputated. They're coming back quadriplegics. They are coming back with burns, third-degree burns from explosions and things of that nature. And so she's talking about, even in the space of it, she's talking about the fortitude that some of them have, the notes that they write on the door about not giving self-pity. She's talking about the fact that one of the soldiers, even with all of the burns he has on his skin and he's in pain, he's still in the space of getting up to attempt to salute his general's wife, who's also in the hospital. And I was just like, oh, wow. The resilience of the young people who actually signed up to go into the military, to go fight a war because of the belief in the country. I do understand that not all military members have a belief in it that way, but from what her standpoint was in her writing this, that was one of the things that she definitely highlighted. She also talked about how they prioritize family time with the things concerning their daughters, Sasha and Malia. And one of the things that she talked about was the big things that she dealt with in her schedule, that Barack dealt with in his schedule. They became mute and of non-effect for the time at dinner at 6:30 p.m. where they would sit and eat dinner at the table. It was all about Sasha and Malia, what friends, what activities, who said what to who on the lunch yard, honey. And that was it. That is all. You don't bring nothing else to this table, was basically their approach. And she talked about why it was their approach. And it was mainly because she didn't think it was fair to take the dining room table space for family time to discuss everything that was needed by the country, the decisions that Barack Obama was making, the initiatives that Michelle Obama was pushing. She felt like none of that was fair to override the table with, and that the fairness was actually to give space to the girls. And I was like, okay, talk about just your talk about your tips on parenting here, guys. Then she also talked about how she got this segment about how Barack Obama was out here writing responses to letters. So writing responses to letters that he received, and that his staff would pick out. And so they would actually pick out, 5 to 10 letters on a day-to-day basis. And they ranged from, oh my gosh, thank you so much for all of the service that you do, we believe in you, to, oh my gosh, you suck and you're dumb, and why are you even in this office type of scenario. And so here's one thing that I noticed that she talked about. He didn't read letters in a vacuum. He gave both extremes the space to say whatever it was that they were going to say, and he responded to whichever ones his staff picked out, whether they were on the stream of, oh, you are doing a great job, to what in the world are you doing? And because of that, I sat in that space, and I actually said this in my book club with a few friends of mine. And what I said was, the more I continue to reread this book, the more I realize and am solidified in the fact that America needed Barack Obama as its president, but I don't necessarily know if America really deserved the type of president that Barack Obama was attempting to be for the nation. To have someone well balanced, well steady, in a space where people are calling you the greatest president alive or the worst thing to happen ever, and to still remain resolved to serve all of those individuals. But the amount of, again, like I told y'all, when she said that the counselor said that she wasn't Princeton material, and then she didn't even go back to tell that counselor that she made it in. I'm not that resolved. God bless them and the anointing that they walk in to be steady people. That's all I gotta say, because that's leaning friend. That's not my anointing. It ain't maybe I'll pray about it, but I don't know. I just know that it's not my anointing right now. That's all I gotta say. And then I had a moment where I had to take a break and I had to go take a lap, even in the space of going back to the parenting piece and the safety piece and the normalcy piece that we've been talking about over these last few weeks, and how Michelle Obama talked about how they're really resolved around, she understands that she's in a space where she has a privilege because she's raising her girls with a whole staff that can keep up with her girls when she's out and about doing the things that other people don't have, right? She acknowledges that in the chapters. But one thing that is also just a big to-do is when the threats do happen. And so a parent walked up to Malia and asked Malia basically if she was afraid and how would she, why does she feel the need to do the things? And she said that she gave the fact that Malia gave her own response, and she said, my daughter, as she grew, was learning to use her voice, discovering her own ways to reinforce the boundaries she needed. And so this lady who approached her and said, aren't you afraid out here, as she's practicing tennis? Mind you, she's practicing tennis. The Secret Service man is somewhere around, and the woman walks up to her and asks her, isn't she afraid? And she said, Malia replied, if you're asking me whether I ponder my death every day, she said to the woman as politely as she could, the answer is no. Shout out to teenage Malia using her voice and just setting that parent straight, because she was first and foremost, that parent was out of pocket, out of line, and just out of bounds. Flag, I wish I had a whistle. Flag on the play, 15-yard penalty. Take it back. Cause girl, what are you doing? What are you doing to approach someone else's child in the school? And I mean, the audacity to approach that child and to put the burden of what her father does on the kid. She's hitting a tennis ball, and you put a grave worry of whether or not she should be concerned about her death on a moment by moment basis. How dare you inflict that type of fear on this child as she's just getting some space to spread her wings and figure out her voice and her individuality? How dare you? So yeah, I had to take a lap on that one, friend, because just inappropriate on so many levels. Michelle Obama actually talked about how the lady did come back and write a letter and apologize for overstepping her boundaries. But for me, the grace and the anointing that they walk in, God bless them, because I don't know if I could have done it, because at this moment you are admitting to me that you approached my child without any type of sense of regard for what flew out of your mouth. And at that point, I feel like I got to read you your rights. Don't you ever, and you're whatever race you are in life, come back over here and talk to that one about her fear or project your fear on her. Don't you ever. So yeah, let's get off of that subject, because I feel myself just like getting upset all over again, and I'm not fixing to take a lap in this video. So all right, so just to kind of end it and round it out for chapter 22, she talked about how like she had some mentorships in the DC area, mentorships for girls in the DC area, and she enlisted a lot of her staff members and other individuals like Valerie and Elizabeth and all these other people on her team to also, mentor these girls, to let them know like, hey, here we are, and we had that because of the mentorship of other women. type of scenario. So I thought that that was wonderful. And then she also talked about how in this space she made it a purpose point because of how busy she was. She also tried to make it a purpose point to continue to invest in the friendships that she had that fed her. So I thought that that was very well done because a couple of my friends and I, we were actually having that conversation at the start of this year about really nurturing and giving space for the friendships that feed us and friendships and people who you know, kind of put themselves in a spot, not necessarily as an inconvenience, but you know, that they give of themselves to nurture the relationship and they meet you where you are. So that was pretty much chapter 22 in a nutshell. Okay. Now, going on to chapter 23. Starting off chapter 23, I was like, yes, ma'am. And I will tell you why, because she actually talked about how she was able to relate to the Sojourner Truths, the Rosa Parks, the Coretta Scott Kings, the Harriet Tubmans. And I just felt like, oh my goodness, because yes, like when she she didn't have a lot of moments to reflect, and she actually highlighted that like while they were in the White House, it was just go, and they had very small moments of or rare moments of reflection, and this is one of them where she realizes that the works of she doesn't necessarily always have relation to the Caucasian predecessors before her. And she just basically understands that, you know, the predecessors before her are Black women, and she realizes that she is the dream of the Black women before her. They made these decisions not necessarily for the change for themselves immediately off, but for changes for women to live in a different type of way. And so I thought that that was actually pivotal for her to actually notice it, think about it, and really process through it. She also brought up her meeting with Nelson Mandela and how that further solidified what she talked about on page 366 about being these Black women's dream. She actually highlighted and talked about, you know, the life of Nelson Mandela. But what she talked about was in all of the spaces of his life, you see him moving towards a betterment, not necessarily for himself, but a betterment for those coming behind him. And I just thought that that was absolutely brilliant for her to actually highlight. And it was like a reminder. She used this also as a reminder to let us know, like, hey, the change that you want to see for someone else, move in steadily in that direction. Have your feet pointed and move in that direction. Does that mean that it's going to happen today? No. Does it mean it's going to happen tomorrow? Does it mean it's going to happen in 5 years, in 10 years, in 50 years? Maybe not. But at some point, some child will live the wildest dream that you thought about. You know, someone will be able to live the wildest dream that you thought about. And so also being in a space to reflect that you are the wildest dream of your predecessors. You know, like, that's wild. That is wild, especially when you sit in that space of knowing the history of our country. That's wild. So Michelle Obama also talks about how she knew how to use, or how she was learning and growing and knowing this space of pop culture. She talks about the introduction, if you will, of the iPhone, the introduction of social media, the introduction of Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and the likes. Like she talked about it. And so in this space of her being first lady, she talked about, you know, how she was able to use the popularity of herself to further give attention to whatever initiative she was working on or whatever idea that she was pointing to that she wanted the American people to, or not even just the American people, but people in general to highlight. Because she was listen, Michelle Obama was pop culture, honey. She didn't go nowhere unless and if she did, you wanted to know what she was working on and who she was wearing. Okay, so knowing that is the case and being in that space, she talked about how how her husband, when he needed to get catchy slogans and stuff like that and strategies for his campaign, he would ask her what her thoughts were and what would appeal to the people, because she had her ear to the streets, if you will. And so he called her, his nickname for her when he was, asking her about those things was he called her Joe Public. And I thought that was quite endearing and really cute to see how he also sought the consultation of his wife in some of the things especially where she had an expertise. In this chapter, she goes through the re-election process. She talks about, the campaigns that she's doing, what initiatives that she's pushing through. Because I believe in this election cycle, because she still had the Let's Move initiative. Let's not get it twisted. She's still working on that. But she also had an education initiative called Reach Higher, which compelled the kids to actually do like an announcement ceremony for what colleges they were going to. But in the space of her actually talking about Reach Higher, she's also having to deal with the roughness of, of her city, where she grew up, where she knows the streets. They are dealing with the issue of gun violence, and how one of the young ladies that was a part of the parade, one of the young ladies that was a part of the parade of the re-election of Barack Obama was shot and killed maybe like 2 weeks after, 10 days after, something like that. Her name was Hadaya Pendleton, and and she went to the funeral of young Hadaya, and she had like she had a dance solo. Her thought she grew up in the neighborhood where their house was in Chicago, where their house was before, not the Euclid Avenue house, but the other house. And Hadaya was, finishing out school. She had plans to go to Harvard, like Michelle Obama had. And I was just like, that was a sad one. That was a really heavy one, because like, her life cut off before she even got started, man. So she's dealing with the heaviness of that. She's dealing with the heaviness of going to William Harper Senior High School, where she's talking to these kids about their particular trajectories and things of that nature. And one thing that she's learned is that the social workers who are also a part of the administration in the school, they really are some of the main ones, not necessarily the only ones, but they are the primary ones who are giving them positive affirmation of believability within their means of what they can do. And I thought, man, and to have her have these conversations with, some of the seniors of the class, some boys and some girls of the class, I think, but it was a young man who asked her, well, what are you going to do about the gunshots? Because like they talked to her about how they have to figure out different routes to and from schools. They have to, even if that means risking walking on a busy street and possibly getting hit by a car, but at least you are a moving target, and it increases your chances for not being shot. And I was like, wow. And at the same time, for her to sit there understanding that this is what her city has come to in some areas and locations. And then at the same time, for the kids to actually explain to her what does, it's going to be 80 and sunny outside. What does that weather basically mean? And they explained to her, like, 80 and warm outside had the reverse effect of them as kids as it had for her. 80 and warm outside means she and Craig are getting on the bicycles. They're going down to the park. Craig's going to go play basketball and she's going to go find her friends or what have you. It's having the reverse effect on them. These kids are staying in the house because if it's 80 and warm outside, the warmer it is, the gang members are out more, which means that the likelihood of a gun battle or gunshots is going to be higher, which means that somebody might get shot. And the experience that these kids had of either seeing their cousin shot, their brother shot, a best friend or something like that, it was just really heavy to really listen to that conversation or sit in, and read that conversation. And for her but one thing that I admire about Michelle Obama, even in that space of having that conversation with those kids, was that when the kid asked, what are you going to do about it? Or what is Washington going to do about it? And she realized in that space that she represented a dichotomy of things. She represented someone who came out of that neighborhood who could actually be a showcase of this is what you can do with your education. And also being someone who is a representative of those people in Washington who could possibly do something. And let me tell you something. I've said this before. If your former first lady is not anything else, she is honest, because she looked at that little boy in his face and she told him, honey, I ain't got nothing for you. In terms of what could be done. She was like, more than likely, those people don't even know you. Which means that more than likely, they're not necessarily concerned about the gun law issues within this country. And she was like, and the only person that's really out here who has the ability to save themselves is you. And she talked about how their survival tactics, their survival mentality, the things that they are already doing, of finding different routes to school, of choosing, of staying up to date and abreast and keeping their ears to the streets, if you will, about which gang is doing what colors to wear, what not to wear. She was like, you're already fortifying your space of survival. And she was like, basically she was telling them, like, she hated that they had to deal with this and that they had to go through with this, but there's not really much that can be done by way of Washington just yet. And even if it was something that could be done, it's not going to be a magic wand. It would take time and time that these kids don't have. So her biggest thing was like, no, you continue to live, thrive, and survive, and you make it out to be able to make the change and do the things that changes for your city. And I thought that, I had double feelings about it. I thought she was very honest, and that is honesty. And she gave these kids the realness, the rawness of it. And like, you know what? Don't depend on anybody to come in and save you. You and your neighborhood and your family members, y'all save yourselves. I thought absolutely great advice. But at the same time, I also thought, but they shouldn't have to go through this. So in the space of chapter 24, she addresses the growth of her daughters and how they are now in high school and they have midnight curfews. She talks about the events that really kind of contrasted reality that she and her husband and their staff were pushing for. Like the arriving of ISIS, even though they got rid of Al Qaeda, the increase in Chicago's homicide rate, the amount of Black men and boys that were still being gunned down by police brutality. She mentioned Michael Brown, Laquan McDonald, Tamir Rice, Freddie Gray, Eric Garner. And how even in those spaces, there was a lack of accountability to the police department. There was also, she talked about these things contrasting the better reality that they want, the better reality that they're pushing for. And she also talked about being a provocation as Black people, as the first Black people of the White House, kind of being like, almost like an enigma, if you will. And she said, I had lived with an awareness that we ourselves were a provocation, as minorities across the country were gradually beginning to take on more significant roles in politics, business, and entertainment. Our family had become the most prominent example. Our presence in the White House had been celebrated by millions of Americans, but it also contributed to a reactionary sense of fear and resentment among others. So she talks about how, like, even though they are moving towards a better reality, there is still some harshness of the reality that we are currently living in that absolutely contrasts the work that is being done, or the work that is attempting to be completed. She said all of that on page 397 to make a big point, and that is that representation matters. She and her husband gave a representation of what your education could do to equalize and place you into other predicaments and situations, even to the greatest of the free world, which is the president of the United States. And so I think that she really, and they weren't selling smoke up anybody's behind. They were actually saying, like, no, we got here. No, we actually live here, and we did 2 terms, which only 11 presidents can actually say that they have done that ever in life. 2 consecutive. Only 11 of the 40. How many is it now? It's 46 of the 46 presidents that have been elected. Only 11 of them have had 2 terms and served it for, so she talked about that, and I thought that was absolutely, she's right. Representation matters. And to see someone who looks like you, or to see someone that is similar to or relatable to your ethnicity or your I don't want to say color, or who's similar to your race and to your ethnicity and to your culture. There it is. To your culture. It is something where it's like, oh, okay, well, maybe I can find some relatability even if I don't see anyone on screen, until I can see someone on screen, or until I can be the change that I want to see, right? She also talked about, like, even in the space of, she talks about the heaviness of the Charleston 9, the fact that her husband had to go speak at Pastor Pinkney's, I think that's Pastor Pinkney's funeral, who was one of the Charleston 9 who was shot. And, the fact that they went to that funeral, and that was heavy to have to go back over that and read, just atrocious as well. But then she also talked about how, it was a heavy day, but it was also a momentous day, because the heaviness was the Charleston 9 and the funeral of the pastor. The accomplishment of the day, if you will, was that same-sex marriage had been passed. And so same-sex couples and allies of the sort were in celebration for that humanistic right to marry the person they love, even if that person is of same gender. Michelle Obama talked about how they lit the White House in a rainbow as a show of their solidarity to the decision that had just been made and had just been passed. And so she talks about how this was an adventure for she and Malia, and how they were just going to go outside. They didn't want to talk to the Secret Service. They didn't want to have the 2-hour meeting about the safety of it. She said she and Malia, they looked at each other and they were like, we're busting out of here. They rushed past the Secret Service going down the elevator. They rushed past the host, the host usher that was down the stairs, and the host was like, hey, First Lady, you may not want to go out there, because all of the all of the paparazzi are out there. And she rethought it and she was like, maybe I don't go out this door because I'm not dressed and I got on my shorts, my t-shirt, and my flip-flops, and ain't got no makeup on, and my hair look a mess. So maybe you're right. Where can we go though? Was her next question. She was like, I'm not taking no for an answer. I'm going out there. And so she said that there was a sense of a lifting of the heaviness by way of seeing the excitement of the crowd that had started to formulate in front of the White House, and to see light of the rainbows on the White House. And so she said that she and Malia just really, really kind of had such a celebratory moment. She does a highlighted review or a quick synopsis of a lot of the things that were passed. The fact that, when they got into office, this was the greatest financial crisis since the Great Depression, and they were able to see jobs come back into the market at a rate to raise, to help to raise the economy. The economy was in a better space. She was still going to the hospital, but she was seeing less soldiers because they were withdrawing the soldiers at a rate from the war. She was talking about like even her Let's Move initiative, and the fact that the supersize and sodas and candy and sugar was now something that was tapering off. Kids would have healthier options at school. It's not just carbs packed and fat packed and obesity and things of that nature. She also but within the family space, she also and she talked about more. I'm just giving you overview because it's their resume list is long. If you go read the book, she'll tell you. But in that space also of them wrapping up and coming to an end, she talks about how they, her and her husband, they would regularly do a commencement cycle or commencement season. And the last commencement that they went to for that season of, I want to say, what was it, 2016? Yeah, of 2016 was Malia's. Malia graduated high school, and she talked about how it was, a surreal moment for her as a mom, and it was a surreal moment for her husband, because in this space he's given a lot of himself, and throughout their marriage and throughout he and Michelle's marriage, throughout the childhood of Sasha and Malia, he's had to share himself with his constituency, whatever his constituency was at the time, and with his family. And so there was a parallel of the two. And so now in this space where, she talked about coming to terms where now he's in this space where he has all of this time, he can actually sit down and spend time with his girls, and his girls are becoming adults and heading out into the world. That was the wrap up of chapter 24. Obviously, we could talk about them endorsing Hillary Clinton. We could talk about Donald Trump and him being a bully and her calling him a bully. But I don't want to, because you were there and we saw it all unravel and happen. So we're just going to move on to the epilogue. And the epilogue actually sums up the chapters in the book very nicely. She talks about how in the wrap up, everybody, one thing that even though they didn't agree with how things, how things shook out, just like their predecessors before them, they were going to do a peaceful transfer of power, and they were going to have the binders for contacts in place. They left handwritten letters of encouragement to the incoming president and his constituency and all of that good jazz. So I'm like, when they go, she even talked about their mantra of when they go low, we go high. And they really did. They went to the highest of highs in this particular circumstance and situation. And I was just like, man. But I will even say even in the space of the peaceful transfer of power, you see the stark contrast in their transfer of power in 2016 versus the transfer of power in 2020. No tea, no shade. That's all facts, no printer. He actually addressed, the election results, how disheartening they have been, and what she talked about even at the end of her book. And she was just basically like, even in the space of seeing disheartenment, and it may seem discouraging, her point was, you got to remain optimistic. And it's not that you remain optimistic for you. You owe it to the kids coming up behind you, the kids who will be your wildest dreams. You owe it to them to still remain optimistic. And I think that that is something that we can actually take in the space of our lives continually, that we owe it to ourselves, even in a space of what seems to be disheartening, even in a space of something that seems to be discouraging. Maybe not the election, but just in our personal lives. We owe it to ourselves to remain optimistic, because at some point our wildest dreams are going to come true, even if it doesn't necessarily come to us immediately. It could still, as long as she talks about it, as long as we keep our feet pointed in the direction that we need it to go, it has no choice but to come to fruition anyway. And so I thought that that was absolutely. Finally, she talked about, she summed up Becoming on page 419. And she said, at 54, I am still in progress. I hope that I always will be. I see it. I hope that I always will be. For me, becoming isn't about arriving somewhere or achieving a certain aim. I see it instead as forward motion, a means of evolving, a way to reach continuously toward a better self. The journey doesn't end. And I thought this was a brilliant way to round out what she talks about in the intro of like the fact of what you want to be when you grow up is false, and it is a falsehood. And she actually showed it by way of her own life and what she did in the White House and her relatability to people who she wrote the book to. But yes, so we're done. I want you to pat yourself on the back, because, friend, reading this book is not an easy feat, but you got through it. You got through. Let me tell you. Now, I didn't read the acknowledgments, and if you wanted to continue because you wanted the extra credit and the gold star, God bless you. Good for you. I didn't do it. But, if you read the acknowledgments, you read 426 pages. And again, God bless you. But if you didn't read the acknowledgments, you at least got to 421, which is still not, it's not anything to gawk at or laugh at. Okay. So let's just go ahead and get the overall review done. After my second time of reading this book again, I absolutely loved it when it first came out, and my friends and I actually went to go see her when she went to Houston, and we went to go see her then. And I also had an opportunity to possibly go see her for Essence Fest of that year as well. I think it was like 2019, because she was still doing the book tour then. And I opted not to, only because I had already gone, but I still would have gone and paid a good coin to go see her again. But I will just say this. The book was pivotal and needed at the time in 2018. And 4 years later, when she's now 58, the book is still pivotal, and you can still take everyday lessons away from it. I think her honesty, the relatability, just the mere fact of her usage of words, and how and just her candidness, her vulnerability in this book to share things that a lot of times most people wouldn't, her bravery to share things and to be this vulnerable and to tell her story, I think was just absolutely phenomenal. 10 out of 10. is what I give this review. Just 5 out of 5, 10 out of 10, 12 out of 12, however you want to count these stars. She got all of them. She got all the gold stars. And that's just it for me. I know we talked last week about introducing fiction into this space, right? So this is what we are reading now that we are done with Becoming. We are going to be reading Stacey Abrams' While Justice Sleeps. Again, this is the Stacey Abrams running for governor. So if you live in Georgia, you need to go on down to your voting polls. I'm not going to tell you how to vote, but I'm just saying, if I was still a resident of Georgia, she would have my vote. And that's on Mary Had a Little Lamb Named Jesus. That's it. That's all. Okay. So friends, this has been fun. This has been a great journey where Michelle Obama has been our fearless leader for these last 2 months. And now, we have to say goodbye. And so home to say goodbye to Michelle Obama. However, we're not saying goodbye to her for long, because November 15th, her book, The Light We Carry, actually comes out. And then I've paced out a possibility of this Stacey Abrams book being a 3-week read, maybe. If not, a 4-week read, which means that if we're going to finish Red Lip Theology before we finish Stacey Abrams' While Justice Sleeps. And if that is the case, coming out of Red Lip Theology will be the time space that is needed for Michelle Obama's book to come into fruition. And so by the time we finish, maybe we jump into maybe we jump into The Light We Carry. If not, we'll jump into another fiction read or nonfiction. Who knows? We'll jump into another book and then pick up with Michelle Obama after that. Okay, guys? So that's all I have. This has been a great read. I have enjoyed this journey with you. And now here we are on to the next book. That is 3 books down for you, friend. We've done The Most Misunderstood Women of the Bible. We have done Marriage Be Hard. And now we have Becoming wrapped up and in a pretty bow. Thank you so much for allowing me to be your best friend in your head as we go through these books. And I ask these questions, and we really take some time to really critically think off of this. So until next week, where we start off with While Justice Sleeps, I'll be seeing you. Bye.